They're all off. They just don't do anything.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Hi, I'm ready to begin. Thanks. Lovely and dark. All right, maybe we should. Can you turn that one back on for a moment, please?
Oh.
Just on this side, just so that I'm not in total darkness. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so let's see. How's everybody doing? So we again have the situation where nobody wants to do their presentation today. This is the calendar for the rest of the semester. From next week on, things are looking pretty full up, which is good. But I guess if there are people who haven't signed up for presentation slots yet, then they need to move quickly. There are a couple of slots left towards the end of the semester. And then once the slots run out, we'll have to talk about what you're going to do instead. So I'm sorry that we don't have any presentations today, unless somebody... It's worth asking. Yeah?
Maybe give us examples of what you think, what kind of topics you want us to think about.
Sure, okay. So you'd like to have a list of topics, just for ideas, yeah. So the thing, I've mentioned this a couple of times, the thing I'd really love is to have you talk about something that you've actually done. Just take us through. This whole idea of what we're doing in the live practical sessions, to sort of share in the experience of actually implementing this stuff. And I think there's a lot to be learned from just seeing how someone else has approached a problem and what happened. It's all very kind of practical and logistical. It's not necessarily that theoretical, but it is. That's as much a part of doing this stuff as anything else. So if there's some project that you've done, even a project, even something within this class, that would be great. Failing that, some of the presentations that we've seen, which have been sort of prepared on some material on some topic, that's fine too. But I'd like to encourage you to actually talk about something where you've actually tried something out, implemented it, and seen what happened. Just like coming up here with MATLAB and just showing us what you did, and then we can talk about what happened. That to me is much more exciting. But I could have a list of. I could put together a list of pieces of code that you could try, and so that would be a good way to do it. So I'll try and do that. Jane.
Will you try to present the stuff based on the paper than on the reading list?
Yeah, on the reading list. There's a reading list.
Yeah, there is a reading. I remember in the.
Yeah, for the mini.
In each homework, there is a couple of the reference.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another way to get stuff to do would be to take a paper and try implementing it, or just try. Well, how does this translate into code? Or maybe they've got code on their website, something like that. That would be great. There are a bunch of papers which I've suggested mentioned in relation to different things. But anything like that, this is the beauty of working in MATLAB. That often something which is kind of sounds like a lot of work, if you have the right MATLAB things existing already, you can try these things out very quickly. And so it's sort of the idea of taking a paper and implementing it sounds like a major undertaking. But in some cases it can be, surprisingly easy. And you can get stuff out very quickly. Like this morning, I was looking at the LPC stuff, and the LPC unit in PD that we're going to use uses a particular form of the LPC analysis based on lattice filters, which are these nice filters where you can sort of stack stack the same unit on itself, and you add a pole every time you stack a stage. And the nice thing about using lattice filters with LPC is it's very easy to test if a particular stage of a lattice filter is stable as a simple condition on the parameter. So it's a good implementation. But the downside of them is that they're not, you can't easily just look at the filter coefficients and figure out what the poles are. So I looked it up in the textbook, and there's this algorithm for converting from the lattice coefficients to the normal filter coefficients that we're used to seeing. But then I thought, I think I've seen something like this before, and there's this set of MATLAB routines called VoiceBox by Mike Brooks in London, and he's got pre-existing MATLAB routines to convert between every possible LPC representation you could think of, and including converting from the reflection coefficients, these lattice filter coefficients to the normal filter coefficients. So I was able to just, it's a routine, but it's been written and it's debugged, and so it's very quick to try that stuff out. So it's remarkable how quickly you can try out ideas like this. So I'll try and make up a set of pointers to things like that, which you can try out if you're looking for ideas for stuff to do. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so the second mini project is now on the website. And again, this is pretty much the same one as we had last year. Let me just show you that. So this one is about singing synthesis. And the goal is to come up with a synthetic version of the Queen of the Night aria, which is this famous aria. Here's the audio of it. So that's taken from a real recording. And this is actually, what I've done here is I've taken a spectrogram of a little chunk of that recording, and this is actually the high. This is the arpeggio with the high note. No. These are the fundamentals. So it's do 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 do. Oh, it's the final part. It's the high. This is famous for having a high C in it, right? Which is note 4. It's a 1460 hertz. I think that's a C6 or something. And so it's at the very end of the thing. Except an octave or two higher. And so this is that little arpeggio there. These very short notes and this very, very high note, which is kind of like this thing that sopranos live in fear of. But you can see here are the individual notes, and you can see that these are the fundamentals, and then here are all the harmonics. And then for these 6 notes, I've sort of sliced the spectra of where these white lines are, and then plotted their slices here, so we can see the instantaneous spectra of these notes. And because this, the top one's pretty high, we don't get many harmonics. The lower one, we can see more harmonics over this range up to 6 kilohertz. If we plot them all on top of each other, we sort of see that different harmonics have different peaks, different frequencies depending on which note it is. But rather than having sort of having the high note just be a sort of stretched out version of the lower notes, it's more like they're all following the same basic envelope here, the sort of this pink line, and then the different harmonics fall under that envelope wherever they fall, right? So there are a couple of ways we could think about synthesizing this. We could take a sinusoidal model of this low note and then just stretch all the harmonics to get different pitches. But if we did that, we wouldn't get this pattern of this peak around 1200 hertz and then it's sort of falling off. We'd get get these things stretching out to be wherever they fell. So, and that's kind of typical of voice, that the formants tend to stay fixed even though the pitch underneath varies. Although there is a second order effect where sopranos actually learn to modify the way they're going to pronounce vowels, because very often they're singing so high that the normal speech formants would fall below the lowest fundamental, the fundamental. So you wouldn't be able to understand the vowel at all. So they do tend to shift the formants a little bit, but in general, the formants don't track pitch. So the idea is to try and do a synthesis of this, and then maybe look at some different ways of trying to separate out the excitation and the formants so you can control them separately, keep the formants fixed while the excitation moves around. And to do this, I provide you with a version of the additive synthesis object. It's the same thing, I added some things to it. Where is it? Additive here. And what I've done is I've added this bit so that you can read in a score file. So it looks kind of like the existing one, but here we're going to read in a sinusoidal synthesis for one of those notes, one of those soprano notes, and then hang on, my screen's not big enough. I just have to do this so I can get to the bottom of the screen, just to turn up the volume on the output object. Okay. You sort of know what the bottom of this looks like. It's just got the little volume slider on it. Oh, that came back at a much better size. Okay, good. So now I can play these notes. That's basically the one note, sung note, and that's just using the keyboard object here to get those notes out. But it also has this read notes and durations thing, which reads in a text file containing the note onset time, note duration, and note number. And then you can just play this, and that'll simulate what would happen if you played it on the keyboard, I guess. So these are the actual notes from a MIDI file of the Queen of the Night aria. Okay, so that lets you play it out. But that doesn't sound particularly convincing, right? You wouldn't even necessarily identify that as being based on singing. So the goal of the project is just to try different things you can think of to try and make it sound more realistic. And it's quite hard to do that. So that was our experience last year, that people tried things that should have worked, and it still didn't sound very realistic. But, again, that's the process, right? The idea of the project is to have an idea, try it out, in the report, explain to us what your idea was, what you did to try it out, and what happened. So have some analysis of what happened, and maybe an effort to improve it. But the whole point is there isn't a right answer. It's relatively open-ended, and don't be too disheartened if it doesn't quite play out like you hope. So I think you've got the information you need to do it here. And then there's this really amazing synthetic version that they did at IRCAM, the Computer Music Center in Paris. So anyway, that sounds very convincing. That was done using this particular process for synthesizing voice using formant functions. So there's a paper here describing that, And then there's some other papers down here on different people who've done work on voice synthesis. There's been a lot of work done on singing synthesis, and there are a lot of factors that make it realistic, like the vibrato in that synthesis and stuff like that. So there are a bunch of things you can try, depending on what you think would be interesting to try. Okay. So on to this week's practical. So the lecture on Monday was about LPC, and so what I want to do today is to experiment with some PD stuff for LPC cross-synthesis. So the main patch is here. And what this one lets us do is we can load in two sound files. So we load in a voice sound file like this. And then an excitation sound file. So we're going to take the envelope from this, the filter, the LPC filter coefficients from this, but then we're going to use the excitation. We're going to use this as excitation, so we're going to apply that time-varying filter to something else, and this is just a little synth patch. Can you actually hear those? So this is the pad. So there's not much going on, but just to give it, it's got some notes in there, and this is the speech.
Cottage cheese with jazz is delicious.
Famous mantra. And so we load them both in, and then what it does, it plays, these units just play a read-in sound file either once or by looping. Do that again. So it plays both sound files and feeds them into this patch down here. And what that does is it takes the two inputs, takes the speech input, it does a little pre-emphasis. This is just a single zero to boost the high frequencies. Puts it into this LPC object. Now this thing is built into PD, or it's built into PD Extended. If you don't have it, then you need to download PD Extended. If you've got PD Extended on the Mac, it should be fine. I'm not sure whether it comes built into and there might be versions that don't have it, but if you get a thing called PD Extended, then it's part of it. So this takes in a chunk of sound, does a LPC analysis. You can specify the order here. Has two outputs. One is the noise residual, the other is the LPC coefficients. The coefficients you can feed into this sort of complementary function, LP reson, which takes both an audio input and a set of coefficients and then just implements the filter and applies it. And then we undo the pre-emphasis, and then that's our output. What we feed in is the excitation. Well, we have the excitation coming in here. There's some fixed scaling. But then what we have to do is we have to scale this by the overall gain that we're getting from this signal here. And to figure that out, we take the residual, and then we have this patch or this subfunction here, which just squares the signal and low-pass filters it, and then takes the square root. So this is just a simple envelope follower. It's the local RMS of the signal. So we multiply it by that local envelope, and that just now gives us an excitation whose amplitude varies in proportion to the total energy of the signal. So that when we feed that into the resonator, the filter, we get the right thing out. This block works. It actually does overlap adding, and it's using this special PD command up here, which allows, in a subpatch, allows you to restructure the blocking. So it takes, instead of the default, the way that PD actually works is it takes little blocks of audio and then computes everything on them and then moves on. By default, I think they're 64 samples long at 44 kilohertz, or is that right? 1.2 milliseconds, something like that. But here it's saying, okay, instead use blocks of 512 samples and use them at half the sampling. Oh, is that right? No, with 2 times overlap at half the sampling rate. So this whole block is operating at 22 kilohertz with blocks of 512 points, which is 25 milliseconds or so at 22 kilohertz. And it has 50% overlap for every block. So every block of 512 is actually 256 from the last frame plus 256 new ones, and then carrying on like this. And then to regenerate, the sort of to reconnect to the outside world, this command automatically causes PD to take each 512 samples that we write out here and then add them with the previous one. So even though we're dealing with blocks of 512 every 256 samples, it still synchronizes correctly with the outside world. It's pretty smart that PD does all that so nicely. But in order to make the overlap add work, we have to make sure that every frame of 512 is windowed by a smooth window like this. And so we have this Hanning window in here, which we define once, and then basically this thing reads that Hanning window over and over again, and then multiplies the two audio outputs by this Hanning window, so that when PD does the overlap add, we get a nice smooth constant level signal with the edges smoothed off. So that's pretty much everything that's going on here. You can change the length of this blocking here, but when you change it, you have to remember to change the length of the window here, which has to match. If you don't, you'll get clicks from the non-alignment, or you get weird effects if the window's too short. So that's that. So what can we try here? Well, a few things you can try. Once you've got it working, you can, instead of using the excitation here, you can also use a noise signal as input. This little block here, audio cell, just has 4 inputs and 1 output. And you can just choose the different inputs by clicking on these boxes. So this is using the excitation, and this would be feeding the noise in. You can change the model order. So this is the actual order of the model that's being used, and you can just grab this and move it up and down. It feeds straight into this model order here, which controls the order this LPC filter is using. So you can see how that affects the sound. You can listen, instead of listening to the actual synthesis, you could listen to the actual the residual output here, which is I guess it comes from the residual from the speech analysis. So again, it's listening to the part without the filter in the speech. You can try varying you can try taking out, not doing the envelope following thing, seeing what happens there. Try varying the block size, see what happens. You could try better pre-processing of the excitation. You could try a different excitation signal. And often you'll find that an excitation signal, because it's got its own filter applied, when you apply the second filter from the speech, it sort of sounds very dull and muffled. So sometimes you want to pre-whiten the excitation. So you could actually use a second LPC in here just to get the residual out. So rather than using the full signal, you just use the residual of the excitation. And this thing sort of works in real time, right? It takes one frame of the live signal, one frame of the excitation, and sort of mixes them together. But it would be interesting to have something which is more like the sinusoidal system, where we have some pre-computed parameters and then we apply those. So you could do that, but what you'd have to do is you'd have to have a separate PD process which reads in a file, performs the LP analysis, and then stores them in a table. And then at synthesis time, you have something which reads from that table and applies them. So you could think about at least how to process that, which might be useful in the mini project. Okay, any questions about that? All right, so let's do what we've been doing. So break up into groups of 5 people or whatever, and then we'll work on this for like half an hour, and then we'll have a chance at the end for each of us to share the things that we've tried and encountered. Okay? All right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me. Okay, the network should be up now.
In the block,
Yeah.
what does it mean? Point five in the third.
It means it's running at half the parent sampling rate.
So that means that it gets only one or two samples out of the.
Yeah. What it ought to mean is that PD is internally doing a low pass filter, a Nyquist filter, and then downsampling. I'm not sure if it really does the Nyquist filter, but presumably does. And then on resynthesis, it's doing interpolation as well. So, because that's the magic, right? That this thing, what going into here, it does the downsampling, and then coming out, it gets a full sample rate signal out again. So, it's upsampling it. That's pretty slow. Yeah, that's downsampled a quarter. You can hear some aliasing there, so I don't think it's not doing the greatest upsampling.
But is it possible to run it on the parent sampling rate, the LPC?
Yeah, but then what happens is you get all these poles in the second half of the spectrum which you don't care about. That's kind of, it's fine, but it's kind of inefficient.
Redundant.
Yeah.
It just changes like how much.
So the sound is almost the same, right?
Yeah. It's just like it should have more high frequency in it, but you don't really care about that second half. Between 11 kilohertz and 22 kilohertz, it's not a big part of the sound. And feel free to choose other speech files as well if you want.
is what I had asked it to
Yeah.
a while prior.
No, I haven't had that.
Like I was clicking play, nothing happened.
Yeah.
I hit test auto, and it goes cottage cheese with chives.
Yeah. So maybe the DSP wasn't on, but it was
It was on,
complete
yeah.
audio.
Yeah. I had it working for a while. Then I clicked it, and nothing. Doesn't matter. I'm just
Yeah, no,
curious.
I've never had that on my system. I had other bad things happen. but not
Okay.
that one.
It's just an odd behavior. It must be something.
So what are you guys doing?
Probably the noise level,
Yeah.
changing the excitation to noise.
Yeah, we're gonna excite it with a noise input. What happens if you switch them? Where did that voice clip isn't famous or anything, is it?
It's famous in some circles. It's part of this database called Timid, which is like the most well-known database in speech recognition.
Okay.
So it's a series, and the utterances were chosen to be phonetically balanced. So
Okay.
it's like a set of 600 utterances, and they all have a nice range of different phonemes.
Okay.
And they're spoken to several people.
Okay. Because I googled that phrase and nothing in particular. It was more recipes with cottage cheese and
Oh
chives.
no, you'll find it. You'll find it.
Okay. So they
'Cause,
probably
like,
took
it's
out
not- it's not
R
about language.
is, yeah.
If you do
Once you get
the
past the
exact
recipes.
phrase, yeah. Once again, what are you guys doing?
Just messing with the block size and order.
Oh yeah,
seeing
yeah.
what
It's interesting. It does crash for me.
So if you make the block size really big without making the order very large,
Yeah.
you're going to get worse and worse, well, sort of worse predictions because it's trying to use so much data.
Because it's going to be fixed to have, will only have one set of filters for a longer amount of time. Right. So
It's kind of getting like an average.
exactly. So it should blur it out. Yeah. And if you can hear that, you should. You have to probably go up, 4 or 8 times what we're doing now. That sounds like that croaking sound.
Yeah.
That's the panning window being too short. So it's like
I thought I'm gonna put them both up to 1024.
You have to click on the little thing. You have to click on that to actually run it. Oh, but not in edit mode.
Oh.
To go out of edit mode and click on it.
Click on.
That little flag thing, and then it'll rewrite it.
Oh, okay.
I was trying to add an extra LPC onto
Yeah.
executing. And so I
Yeah.
did it right here.
Yeah.
But there's no sound coming in anymore. So I don't know if we hooked it up wrong or something. Does it need its own model alert or something?
And the noise in a second.
That's what I would do. Is it just maybe it's very quiet or something?
Oh, maybe.
But, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
so there's some sort of the output of the residual is going to be low energy.
What is the 12 on that?
12 is the default order.
Oh, okay.
So it gets overridden by whatever comes in from the order.
Okay.
Like we have 4 inputs. So like, what do you want to do? So how would you set up the retention?
Yeah, this is the
cottage cheese with chives is delicious. Cottage cheese with chives is delicious. Cottage cheese with chives is delicious. Cottage cheese with chives is delicious.
generates this year, this. So, what if you play the ball? Yeah, that's what
Like, I mean, instead of adding, you're adding. You're not really feeling it.
Keys with jazz is delicious. Keys with jazz is delicious.
Sorry? Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think so. Depends what the salary. Okay, let's try reporting out. So I've got a couple of things to show, but would someone else like to tell us what's going on, what they've been doing? What have you guys been doing?
We were just playing. Well, first we put, like you said, we put the voice signal in the first loading thing, and the music in the second. And then we tried the thing where we listened to like the noise, and then with the first box selected and the audio select, it was like the voice signal together with the music signal, and then the second box, it was like just like noise there, so it was like more clearly just the voice.
Yeah.
And then we played with the filter value, the filter order. And when the filter was like very low, I think that, well, then it was like all like heard more of the music signal. And like the voice was kind of drowned out. And when it was higher, like the voice was, we were able to hear it. The voice.
Let's just listen to that. So, or not. No, what am I doing wrong here? I've broken my one now. Doesn't quite need to change this at all. It's very strange. Maybe, hang on. Sorry. Sorry, I've broken it. Yes, that's too bad. So when this order gets very small, you can't hear the voice anymore. It just sounds like the music. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been like altering it. We're trying to figure out exactly why.
Yeah. What have you found?
Well, like substantively, what exactly?
Anything.
For low order, the voice actually very good. I mean, that's only the excitation.
It left nothing but varying intensity.
Sorry? It just varies in intensity.
You're left with nothing but a varying intensity.
Right. So it still tracks the intensity. Let's see if I can get this working again.
But it takes very little on a scale of 1 to 100 to actually
On the box.
Thank you. Something's slipping somewhere. So we bring the order right down. Right, it's still following the envelope of the speech, but there's no formants there. And then as we have a lot of points, it does a lot. Yes. I mean, that makes sense, right? So when we're using a very low model order, we're just fitting a few poles. If we're using a first order model, it's just a constant factor or something. So it just models the energy. But as we have more than 3 or 4 pole pairs, then we can get something that sounds more like speech. Okay. Who else would like to talk about something that they've done, found? What do you guys? Yeah. Yeah.
So you basically hear the expectation all through, but it's still, you can still hear some of the voice coming through as well.
So you took out this envelope thing here?
Right. And then,
Oh no, sorry, you took out the multiplying by the envelope.
yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know,
So we can just
noise, you can actually hear the noise constantly, it'll never stop. From there, it's just always
sorry. It's too loud.
Cottage cheese with chives is delicious.
Yeah. It's not bad though, is it? Actually, you don't. That envelope part isn't that critical. So okay. Thank you. That's interesting.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is this basically how they call it like vocoder works?
Yeah. This is. I mean, there are different ways of building a vocoder, but this is one of the best. I mean, for this effect. Yeah. What were you guys doing? Here.
So we were playing with the residual and
Yeah.
listening to the residual, and then we changed the filter order. We could just hear the speech in the residual. So we still have some speech signal in the residual.
Right. So if you have a low order filter, you're not stripping out the envelope, and so the speech stripping out the spectral envelope, and speech remains in the residual. That's interesting. So then we can do that. We can actually listen to the residual here. It's not me. Okay. What's going on? Am I only listening to one channel? Okay, so it's very quiet. So that's interesting. That's just the straight residual. But if we turn the filter order right down, then nothing is. It's normalizing the gain, right? It's pushing up the noise in the quiet parts, but otherwise it's the same. And then as we increase the order, it becomes increasingly noise-like because more and more the spectrum's been taken out. That's interesting. Okay. What else people been doing?
We're looking inside the envelope generator.
Yeah.
And getting rid of the squaring.
Oh yeah.
That gets rid of the sound. And we're playing around with the cutoff frequency of the
Oh yeah.
smoothing. And
Right. So the squaring, so this is taking a low-pass filter, so it's smoothing the signal out. If you don't square it, it's going to find the average level of signal. Signal is generally zero mean, so it's not going to do anything. Yeah.
So like finding the magnitudes.
Right. Exactly. It's trying to find the magnitude, but then it's taking the magnitude, taking the average, and then trying to. This is not exactly what we wanted. This was a hack, something I put together to try and make it work. And what I was doing just now was trying to see if I could make that work a little bit better. Let me show you what I did. Because what we really want is to take the entire frame of the residual and just figure out the total energy of that. That in MATLAB, when we do the LPC, it gives us a vector, a matrix of the coefficients and then one gain value for each of those coefficients. And that's really the appropriate thing to do. So what I did here, I wrote a new patch called myenv, a local patch called myenv. And it uses some weird things which I just found out about, some weird PD operators. It does the same thing of squaring it up. This plus zero does nothing. So it squares it. Then it does pack twiddle. Pack twiddle takes a frame of audio and then outputs a list at control rate. So it outputs one list for every frame, just as, this is effectively a list of whatever it is, 512 numbers. Sum takes a list of numbers and adds them up. And then so it just gives me the sum of all the numbers in that one frame of audio. But you see these are control rate, these are white box items. Take the square root of that. And then sig takes a control rate signal and just pretends that it's an audio rate signal, so it has a constant control rate output. Right, so this actually now takes a frame of audio in and writes a frame of audio out, but the frame of audio out is a constant number, which is the energy, the sum, the root mean square of, or the summed mean square, so the scaled root mean square of the signal. So that's I didn't know how to do that before, and this is what I wanted. The problem with this is it has a frame's worth of delay. So what actually happens is, because of the way PD works for the audio level, it doesn't do computation sample by sample. For every block that has a black input and a black output, it writes in a block's worth of audio and then reads out a block's worth of audio. And if you're able to do the computation so you can keep it in sync, then you can make them in sync. But for the white items, what happens? So I guess pack is the culprit here. Pack has an audio rate input and a control rate output. I don't know. Somehow in here, the frames are being delayed by one frame. So the actual value I read out is the energy of the last frame, not the energy of this frame. And so to make it work, I had to do, here's my envelope thing. This is where PD gets confusing, right? So here's my envelope thing on top there. But then I take my LPC coefficients and I have to put them through a one frame delay here. So this is a list of the coefficients. List is like a little buffer that will store a list and read it out. And then T is trigger, which basically is used for sequencing how the order in which things happen in PD. So what that happens is this list gets written out. It gets written to a trigger, which first runs a bang, which runs here, which reads out the last value of list, and then it writes the list to this second input of list, which then is the list that's stored for next time around. So by having this little block in here and basically delaying the set of LPC coefficients by one frame, one control cycle, and that's to try and make them sync up with the energy estimates, which I'm getting out of my envelope thing here. So if we listen to this, after we've loaded in the sound files, something is not right here. I'm not sure what's causing that. I think I've screwed something up somewhere. Hang on, let me try it with noise. With noise, what? Yeah, something is clipping. It sounds the same, but that sounds smooth apart from the clipping. And if I didn't have the delay in here, if I just write those straight out. I don't know. I'll put this patch up afterwards, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't sound quite right, because basically what I'm doing then is I'm using the energy from the previous frame with the filter from the current frame. So there's a one frame skew between the energy estimates, the gain estimates, and the filters. And somehow that just doesn't, they don't quite sound right. And so there's a little bit of, I think it doesn't sound quite smooth. So I think I've got that working, but we can't hear it properly now, so we'll have to try it later to figure that out. But this is kind of where, this is definitely where, PD has this beautiful abstraction where it's just like they're just wires, everything's flowing down the wires, and then after a while suddenly it bites you that, well, no, you can't literally have it instantaneously running things down wires. It has to put them into blocks. And then you have to understand exactly where the sequencing is. And this kind of thing where you have to worry about the execution order, the right to left execution order, and using the trigger items. That's where things get for me, mind twisting. Okay, any other comments, stuff that people tried on this? Okay. All right, so I guess that's it. I'll see you on Monday.